Hi, my name is Jonathan Walsh, aka breadchubby from breadchubby.com, and tonight I'm going to talk to you about the art of sourdough. We've heard a lot about sourdough baking during the pandemic. Well, tonight I'm going to break down and show you the ingredients, the process, and why there is such a love for sourdough. If you're able to bake sourdough in your own home, you will not regret it. So let's talk about what is sourdough. Sourdough has been baked for centuries, dating back to 3700 BC. Sourdough is a very simple process. It uses three natural ingredients: flour, water, and salt. When you place flour and water together, naturally occurring yeast in the air and around us and on the food we eat mixes with natural occurring bacteria called lactobacilli. This creates a perfect environment for sourdough. Sourdough is a process where the lactic acid byproduct creates this sour taste to the dough, and the yeast, naturally occurring, automatically leavens the dough to make beautiful bread. So tonight we're going to go through some of those steps. You're going to see some of the main ingredients that we're going to focus on, and it's all very naturally occurring. And I do like to support local, so a lot of my ingredients are coming as locally as I could possibly source them. So let's talk about the starter. Starter has two ingredients in it: water and flour. The flour I get is a whole organic rye, which I get from Tyrone Mills. It's a stone ground rye from stones that they received in France back in 1846. I do my best to support local as much as I possibly can, and certainly this product is amazing. If you're ever up in Tyrone, check out the Tyrone Mill. So, get back to the starter. My starter is called Bethany. Why do we name starters after ladies? Well, the starter is the mother of all my breads. Cultivating the right starter, growing and learning about starter, these are all things which take time and practice. That's the only other ingredient you have to add when you're making sourdough: time. Let's talk about the ingredients. Flour, unbleached, water, bottled water or spring-fed water is probably the best, and salt. Those three ingredients make up the base of all of the doughs that you're going to be seeing featured in this video. Other ingredients that I utilize are marbled cheddar cheese, mammoth olives, cranberries, raisins. I've got a great cinnamon, sort of pumpkin spice mix that I add to one of my products, jalapeno and cheese. With sourdough, you can kind of add whatever you want because it always tastes great. So why is making sourdough an art? So we're taking a process which has been used for generations, we're perfecting it, we're using traditional methods to make a beautiful product which is both beautiful for the eyes and nourishing. This is why the art of making sourdough is something that I've been trying to perfect and keep involved with everything that I do with all of my breads. You can learn to do some fancy scoring, which is designs on top of the bread when you're baking it, or you can do a simple four-cross. It's really up to you, but however you put your art into the sourdough is how it's going to pay off. So I'm going to talk about some of the breads that you see featured in this video. All of my bread comes from a very same base. I use an unbleached flour with an organic rye starter. You're going to see a classic made traditional sourdough, which has no real ingredients but flour, water, salt. You will see a rye-based one. You'll see a jalapeno and cheese. You'll see some olives. You'll see a whole bunch of different types in this video tonight. So all of these, take note of the ingredients. You can, again, explore sourdough to whatever interests you. You can add the ingredients that you like to add. Let's talk about setting up sourdough and making a classic sourdough. So after you have made your starter, you add the starter to your flour, the base of what's going to be the entire part of your bread. And the process is a little bit long. This is where that patience and time comes into play. So I like to say that I take a little bit of starter, maybe a tablespoon of my starter, and I add that to about 75 to 100 grams of flour and water. And I let that mix up, and then I let that sit overnight. What I'm allowing to happen is the yeast and the lactobacilli that's already in the starter to basically infect the rest of the dough. The next morning, or the next day, after at least 18 hours of time, all the yeast would have had an opportunity to start to eat some of the proteins and start to metabolize some of the starches and stuff that's present in the flour. I then take that mixture, which has now been infected with my starter, and I add that to the bulk of the dough. Now here's where some of the art in the process comes in. We're adding some of this starter mixture to more flour and water. That's it, nothing else. Mixing it all up, and we're going to let it auto-lease. Auto-release means we're going to let the dough hydrate. We're going to let it absorb some of the waters and really try to not leave any dry spots within the bowl that you're using. You can use any type of standard bowl as long as it's big enough to hold the amounts that you're baking. I then add my salt with a little bit of water afterwards. I do that because salt and yeast sort of don't talk to each other very well, and adding some salt to some water first helps buffer that effect. But you need salt to help develop the gluten. The gluten is where you see the dough become stretchy. You start to see some bubbles forming from the gases that are being released from the yeast, which is eating up all of the proteins and producing burping, basically causing carbon dioxide to be released. When the gluten develops in the sourdough, you'll see these big bubbles. That means that the gluten has developed. It's holding the dough together. It's holding those bubbles in, and that's what causes the dough to rise. So that period, you help develop the gluten. And how do you do that? With a series of what we call stretch and folds. So you'll take the dough that you've had and we'll mix it up and we'll fold it on top of each other. You end up folding for about 2.5 hours, maybe every 30 minutes to develop this stronger gluten in the bread. And it's thoroughly mixing the rest of the ingredients together. Then you wait again. What do? You take that mixture that you've been let auto-lace for 2.5 hours, then you've done stretch and folds for 2.5 hours, and then you're going to put it in the fridge overnight to do a little bit of a cold fermentation. In essence, you're just going to let the yeast continue to work its way throughout the dough, and it's going to develop some flavors. I typically cold ferment mine overnight, and then the next day I bring them out. That's when I'm ready to bake. I'll take it out of the fridge. I'll cut it up. You'll see I'll shape it into the sections that I'm looking for, and you'll see the process of what I do, which is called laminating. So I flatten the bread out. So I've got my measurement, I'll flatten the bread out. I'll add my ingredients. Let's say I'm adding some cheese or some jalapeno. I'll nicely spread that out into the dough, and then I'll start to fold it and shape it. Once I've got it mixed in and folded and shaped, I'll then take my dough scraper and I'll make a circle around with it, and I'll try to pull it into a nice tight ball. This is something we're doing. We're creating that tension on the top of the dough itself, the dough ball, before we bake it, because when we score it, so we're sort of slicing the top of the dough, when it's in the oven and it rises and we get this oven spring, we're directing where we want the spring to go, and that's what opens it up, almost like a flour. So you can get a basket, you don't have to use a banneton, you can use whatever you want, but you flour it up, you'll put your dough in there, and you'll let your dough sit so it can start to develop its shape. From there, you will take the dough out of the banneton, usually onto some parchment paper, and that's what you'll use to lift that, and I bake them in an oven. You can use any standard type oven as long as it can get to 500 degrees. So I bake mine very hot, and I use a Dutch oven or a cast iron pot with a lid that actually goes into the oven as well. It's baked for probably 25-30 minutes. What's happening here while we have a lid on is that the steam is being released from the dough, which is being cooked by the heat. When the steam releases, the lid captures that and softens the crumb, because otherwise it would be so hot. If you didn't have a lid on, the top of the crust would dry out and then the bread wouldn't be able to expand. So it would be really sitting flat. After about that 25-30 minute period, you'll take the lid off the Dutch oven from there, and that's where you're going to allow the oven to continue to cook a little bit longer so it can brown it and you get that nice brown color. I sometimes call mine a tartine color, which is that nice sort of dark. I like my loaves really, really dark. So as you can see, making sourdough is a process. It takes time. As you get better and you perfect your craft and you perfect the art of what you're doing, you'll make improvements and you'll tweak it here and there, but it'll start to develop something unique to you. And you'll find that the smell, I guess I should say, you'll find that the aroma of having freshly baked bread is amazing in your kitchen. Once you've baked your first sourdough loaf, I guarantee you and your family will not go back to store-bought bread. I hope that you follow along on this journey of making sourdough. If you're interested in learning more about the breads that I make, please visit me at www.breadchubby.com. You can check out the type of items that I offer there. You can always send me a note and follow along with my blog as well. You can see me on Instagram at breadchubby and Facebook as well. Also, everything breadchubby. So hope to see you guys, and thank you to the City of Pickering for putting together this art fest. I'm really honored to be able to participate. Thanks so much.